Welcome back to the Team Orders podcast. I'm Victor.
And I'm Seb.
And my oh my, has it been a chaotic couple of days since we left Australia.
You are so right, Victor. We've had drama online with social media. We have drama currently in the Middle East. Are 2 races going to be canceled? And we head into our first sprint race weekend of the calendar season.
The backlash of the new regulations has been crazy. Everybody's been talking about it online. Every morning when I open Instagram, the first 10, 15 points are, I don't like the new regulations. All these new regulations suck. But at the same time, F1 is censoring all of the comments on their posts regarding all of these new regulations and how they suck.
It's interesting for F1, they released this one social media post saying that this year's race had 3 times more overtakes than last year's race. And at first, they were getting a lot of hate. And at that point, F1 should be censoring hateful comments. That has no space in this sport. But when there's valid criticism about these new rules and regulations that we've been waiting for a few years now, and they're censoring F1 fans who have been with the sport and their diehard teams forever, and they're just censoring them. They really want to promote the sport, these new regulations. However, there's been so much negativity.
Yes, I mean, the new regulations were mainly put in place, well, especially the engine regulations, because you had Audi coming into F1. They didn't want to build an MGU-H, and to accommodate that, they kind of changed the engine regulations so that Audi would have an easier path into the sport, right? So a lot of these changes were made with corporate funding in mind and the amount of money that sponsorships can bring into F1. But on the other side of the scale, you have the fans. The fans who have been screaming that we want those V10 engines back. The fans that have said, bring back real racing. The backlash since the battery was introduced back in, was it 2014? Into the sport has been crazy. And now with even more battery being added to the engine regulations, it's just causing even more backlash. But the fact that F1 is censoring valid criticism, I think, is the concern here. Yes, you're right. Hateful comments should be censored. But valid criticism, that is pure censorship.
Yeah, Victor. And I think we mentioned this on the recap pod, the recap episode from Australia, but I think we both really enjoyed the racing between Ferrari and Mercedes in those first 15 laps. So I understand criticism. F1 fans, they don't like change, and I think that we just need to give them more time, because I thought if we keep getting racing like we saw in the first 15 laps of Australia, I think we're in for a pretty good start to these new regulations.
It will be interesting to see. The racing we had between Charles and George was amazing. However, all the other overtakes that happened in the midfield and in the back of the grid did feel a little bit artificial. It wasn't so much who had the bigger balls going into the turn and breaking the latest. It was more so, who harvested the most energy throughout the lap, and then you would easily sail past. How this develops moving forward, especially with the development wars that's going to come now.
As mentioned over the weekend, it's less about the actual driver's ability to actually race on track with one another. It's whichever driver has the best ability on battery management. And that's interesting because George and Mercedes are clearly at the top and clearly one of the front runners with using battery management. However, we had a very funny scenario happening on a plane between Australia and China. There's been a post going viral right now on Twitter saying that someone overheard Isaac Hadjar and Kimi Antonelli as they were basically confirming with one another that both Bahrain and Saudi Arabia race are going to be canceled. And Isaac said to Kimi, "That's 2 more races left, 2 more races less for you to win," which I think is hilarious. That the reason why that we've heard the news that Bahrain and Saudi are going to be removed from the calendar is because Isaac and Kimi couldn't shut up and just couldn't stop yapping on their plane ride to China.
They're not rookies, but it certainly is a rookie mistake. Leaks happen everywhere. Max Verstappen voiced his concerns about the current regulations during an FIA meeting after the race, and those also got leaked. This is getting leaked. And obviously the race cancellations due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. What's going to be interesting is that teams are going to have about a month's time between Japan and the following race in Miami. This will give teams lots of time to really further develop their cars, come up with solutions, and spend the necessary time back at the factory improving their cars.
It's going to be the first time F1 might have a spring break. You know, they've always been known for having a summer break, but now they get a spring break. You know, are the teams going to go down to the DR, to Fort Lauderdale, go party, enjoy some sun?
It's so fitting that we have a spring break and the next race is in Miami, because they can go party in Miami and then they're already there for the race.
You know, exactly. This is called strategy right here.
Miami will be very interesting. But before we have Miami, we have Japan. And before we have Japan, we have China. Now, China is a very different track from Australia. There's lots of twists and turns, and then one very, very long straight. Mercedes and Ferrari both have very different strengths. Even this early in the season, they're pretty visible. Charles had much better battery management during Australia than George did. George was getting greedy when doing his overtakes in the first 10 laps, and he was using up too much of his battery in the wrong parts of the track. In Sector 1 and Sector 2 in China, Ferrari is going to have a massive advantage. Lots of twists and turns, lots of opportunities to regenerate and charge your battery, but Mercedes will ultimately have that straight line advantage, which will help them a lot in Sector 3, which is where that very long straight is. It's one of the longest straights on the calendar. So the wheel-to-wheel racing throughout the entire lap is going to be very, very interesting to see. And I think that Ferrari has a much better chance at challenging Mercedes for that P1, P2 spot this time around than in Australia.
As you mentioned, the Mercedes have the better straight line speed. However, it will be interesting to see with Ferrari bringing their new design rear wing to China. Will they be able to close that gap to Mercedes? I think it will be close, and it will be very interesting to see. And I'm kind of pulling for Ferrari because I would love to see, you know, an actual fight for the win in China this year around. As we saw last year, Ferrari were very strong in China. That's when we saw Lewis. He won the sprint race. It was kind of the only time he was on the top step of the podium all of 2025. So it'll be interesting to see if Ferrari can replicate their dominance from China from last year.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to see the new rear wing in action. So for reference, for those of you who haven't seen, Ferrari has come up with a completely new rear wing concept. And instead of opening like this and flattening out as the current rear wing does, what the rear wing will do is completely flip upside down. And because there's a little bit of a curve, the wing is now going to create lift, and this will in turn help their straight line speed as it eliminates a lot more of the downforce than just a regular rear wing does.
It's something very unique and something we've never seen in F1, so I'm very interested to see how Ferrari pulls that off, especially in race pace as they're opening up every single lap. But I think the biggest part of China is where are the actual drivers going to make the overtakes? I know there's great opportunity in turn 1 and sometimes in braking zones throughout Sector 1, Sector 2. But I think the biggest opportunity to make overtakes is down that main straight in China. However, with these new regulations and this new word called clipping, it's going to be interesting to see how many overtakes we're seeing on the back straight. I think it's going to be way more than usual, because I think we're going to see very often that the drivers are going to have to let go of the throttle way earlier than they would used to before the braking zone. Victor, how earlier are they going to have to start slowing down that straight?
So they won't necessarily lift off the accelerator too much, but what's going to happen is that different drivers will be deploying their batteries at different points in the straight. So some might want to get an immediate advantage from the exit of the turn and will deploy it right as soon as they get on the accelerator. Others might wait 25, 50% into the straight to deploy that battery to ensure that they are able to make that overtake as late as possible to prevent too much clipping from happening, and then be able to take that hairpin and maintain the optimal line and keep that position. Because we all know that there is danger of one, switchback, and two, of getting or overtaken after you've done your overtake if you run out of battery. So for sure, it will be interesting to see where the overtakes happen. The hairpin will be one, as you mentioned, sector 1 and 2, the braking zones. There are many, many opportunities. So I think this will be a very exciting race. And I do think that Ferrari has a much better chance here than they did in Australia, given that they are able to keep their strategy in check. And that is why I am predicting P1, Charles Leclerc, P2, George Russell, and P3, Lewis Hamilton.
Double Ferrari podium.
Double Ferrari podium is my prediction for China. What about you?
I love your optimism for Ferrari right now. However, I still think that Ferrari, they don't really have the same they don't have a certain mentality to win races yet. I think I need to see them a bit more in action for me to start predicting them to start winning races. That's why I'm going to say George, he's going to win back-to-back races in China. P2, I think it will be Lewis Hamilton, because as he's shown from last year, he loves his track and he can perform well on this track. So I have him as P2. And then I have P3 as Kimi Antonelli, as we saw in Australia that he had great pace and he only finished 3 seconds behind George at the end of the race. So I think he has a lot of pace in that car that he can finish on the podium. So that is my podium predictions. George P1, Lewis P2, and Kimi P3.
We shall see, we shall see. We both have Mercedes and Ferrari at the top. It's difficult to see any other team really catching up to them, with McLaren finishing almost a minute off the pace of the Ferraris and slightly over a minute off of Mercedes. But guys, thank you so much for tuning into our shorter Chinese GP preview episode. We will be back after the race on Sunday with a much longer episode breaking down everything that happened during the race and the championship implications moving forward. We'll see you then.